creation issue caused a lot of problems for Christians. There are a lot of believers that really struggle with this. There are a lot of non-Christians that won't consider Christianity because they believe that in order to be a Christian, you have to believe that the Bible is, it says that you have to believe that the Bible claims that the earth is 6,000 years old. And they have difficulty with that. Okay? And so the title of the program here is Evolution and Creation, because this is always presented as a dichotomy usually. Either God did it through fiat creation, through he just reached down, grabbed a bunch of dirt, and boom, turned it into humans, or it happened through a slow evolutionary process. And based on quantum mechanics today, I think that there is a possibility that both could be involved. Now, I'm going to offer a disclaimer here and say, I don't know. My position is, I really don't know. I mean, that's my honest position. I don't know how he did it. I really don't. There is evidence for, you can make evidence for both cases. You could present evidence for both. I don't personally, it doesn't come up in my everyday living. When I read Genesis, the point that I get is that God did it, not how he did it. Okay, I've been on both sides of the argument, and with quantum mechanics, though, comes the idea that maybe it's possible that both processes were involved. It sounds impossible, and it's going to take some complicated explaining. But let's just get in with it, and I'll just show you the evidence that we have here. Okay. First, what I want to do is to start with a video from a guy that we looked at in class a long time ago when we were discussing near-death experiences. This is a fellow named Richard. He had, before he died again, he wanted to make sure that he told the world what happened on his first near-death experience. He had a massive heart attack, and they had to go in and do open-heart surgery. Now, in his particular case, they had to freeze his body, take his heart out of his chest in order to effect the repairs. Now, while they were pulling his heart out, or even before they pulled his heart out, he had a pretty extensive near-death experience. And it's very moving. Now, I'm not going to show his whole near-death experience, but I want you to focus on, because this is something he had a problem with. This was, he wasn't really a church-going Christian before that happened. And this is one of the problems he had with God, was, you know, I look at Genesis and, hey, you know, it looks like to me like the Bible says the earth is 6,000 years old. What's up with this? And he actually presents this to God. And I want you to just take a look at Jesus' responses to Richard.
So I'm laying on the table, and there are 3 doctors standing over me and 2 nurses, and they all have their gowns on, their masks on and everything. They're ready to go. And I heard the doctor ask the nurse for the scalpel, and she got it, and she started to open me up from right here down to here. He did. Opened me up like that, and then they got an electric saw out and started cutting my breastbone open. And then I saw them go down and start to take my heart out, and then everything went black. But I was still conscious, but I couldn't see anything. And it was like a heavy black fog, and I'm just standing there looking around. I couldn't figure out what to do next or what was going to happen next. Right then, 2 beams of light came over my right shoulder, so I started to turn around and look over my shoulder to see where it was coming from. And then I heard a voice. And the voice was very authoritative, not loud, but he says, "Don't turn around." And I'm thinking, well, why not? And he says, "Don't turn around, because if you see my face, you'll have to stay here." And he says, "Now, that'll be okay if you stay here, but I have a job for you, and if you disobey me, I won't be happy." And he says, "You don't want to see me unhappy." So I said, "Yeah, well, okay, I better pay attention and do what he says." And then I said, "You know, I know who you are." He said, "Oh, you do?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, I've got a little problem. I've got a little pet peeve. I've got a little bone to pick with you." He says, "Well, what is it?" You know, he wasn't mad or anything, just a normal speaking voice. And I said, "Well, I know that a new generation is born every 10 years. And I know that if you take the square root of 3 generations, it only goes back to about, I think it's about 589 years. And I said, I know that in the Bible it says that Adam and Eve have been on the earth about 6,000 years, something like that. And he starts laughing. I said, well, what's so funny? He said, well, you are. I said, why? He said, your math is wrong. And then I just start thinking, I said, where did I get those numbers? I must have been crazy. I couldn't believe it. I said that because, I kind of like prided myself on knowing math and science. And
I when we watched that, we didn't really focus on that particular part of his story. But then, as I started looking into quantum mechanics and started thinking about this issue, it struck in my mind, your math is wrong. I says, what could you mean by that? Your math is wrong. And certainly, the difficulty that many people have is you look at those different generations from Adam all the way to Methuselah and Noah and so forth, and it just doesn't look like we've been around on the planet very long. And so how do you get away from that idea that it's only been about 6,000 years? And that was kind of the impetus for putting this program together, because I think it is possible that both are right. Now that sounds crazy. How can it be both right? How can the Earth, how can humanity have only been around a few thousand years and several million years? No,
maybe it's both. Maybe you've got some point and you are crazy.
That's a possibility. I'm open to all possibilities here. Okay.
Well,
so.
one thing, not to interrupt, but I heard this man mention this before, and we didn't have time to get into it, nor do we now.
Okay.
But just a thought that is still bugging me.
Uh-huh.
When I heard generations, there's different looks at that. But he said a generation every 10 years.
Yeah, I was a little
That's
bit puzzled.
a little
by
overlapping.
That. Yeah, I mean, 10-year-olds are not usually that precocious.
That's what that's another thing.
I'd have to look that up, to be honest. That did.
He sounds like he's got more thought than that than he
Yeah,
presented here, but I
yeah.
don't know what it would be.
I mean, it sounds like he has a scientific background.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
what I
know
mean.
what his area is. So yeah, I'd have to talk to him further about what he meant by that. Okay. All right. This is issue though. The reason that it's worth discussing is because people who people who are serious about their walk with God and they're total Christians and everything, but some are they believe in evolution, they have no problem with it. C.S. Lewis, for example, was a theistic evolutionist. I've known many solid Christians who believed that. And then I have other people, I have other friends, and myself included. I've been on the opposite side, saying no way, absolutely not, zero. I don't believe in it at all. And sometimes
on both.
Hmm?
I went back and
yeah,
forth.
I've been back and forth on both myself, and you see unnecessary conflict, whereas anger gets involved and people back and forth like, well, you can't really be a Christian, you're preaching heresy, or you are preaching stupidity, and it's like, oh my gosh, okay, let's not do this. It's not worth that. It's just not. The point, you just keep in mind the overall point of Genesis. God did it. How He did it. We'll find out, man. It's not going to take that long, okay? We'll find out.
That's
we
the
will
main
find out.
and takeaway point wherever we
Absolutely.
start or finish,
Yes.
because we notice it's not a requirement.
The point is, what do you believe about who made? If you believe in an atheistic evolutionary process that doesn't require divine intervention, that's where I have to draw the line and say, okay, all right, hold it. There you need to take a look at your math and the probabilities of things of molecules, of atoms getting randomly forming life by itself. The probability is ridiculous, and I think we've talked about that before. And that's we're not even bringing that up.
No,
That's
and
not even. It's not
because
even
you
an issue.
have an insurmountable
Yeah.
question in the beginning with that one.
Yeah. So, not going there. All right. In 2015, I finished my second book, Captorum, which was the sequel to The Last Nephilim. And in that book, we look at a race of creatures called the Nephilim. Now, the novels are historical fiction based on Genesis chapter 5, on this race of being called the Nephilim, who I believe influenced early civilizations to go astray. And that's why when you look back in history at Assyria and Egypt and those emerging civilizations, they're all polytheistic. And I think there's evidence that the Nephilim played a role in doing that. Now this presentation is not about that. It's about the parents of the Nephilim. These were called, in Genesis 6, they called them the sons of God. Another word for them is the Watchers. Okay. Now, they're not called Watchers in Genesis. That term shows up later in the book of Daniel, when basically it has to do with Nebuchadnezzar. But the point is that it's also, that term is also mentioned in the book of Enoch. Now, Enoch is not considered part of the Bible. It's not considered part of the Old and New Testament. It is quoted in the New Testament as a scriptural authority, though. And unfortunately, the copies of the book of Enoch that we have been altered, most likely by the Gnostics. And so we can't accept the whole book because it has clearly been altered. However, the first parts of it are very consistent with Genesis. Now, in the book of Enoch, they describe the Watchers as an angelic race, and they don't really, the book doesn't really say they came down to watch over man. They just leave it as the Watchers. The Watchers, the word is the Irim, I believe, which is plural, or the Ir for IYR is how it's pronounced. And they means awake, conscious, or watchful. So the conscious ones. So they are consciously aware, those who are awake or stand guard. Okay. Now it's also used in terms of other angelic creatures, other angels, archangels, and so forth as well. So I'll keep that in mind, because it's going to come back when we get to our discussion on quantum mechanics. I want you to remember that a watcher is a conscious observer. And right now it's not going to make a lot of sense, but in the future I think that could make some serious sense. Okay.
See where it's headed.
All right. Yeah, in the book of Enoch, there were 200 of these Watchers that came to Earth, and they weren't supposed to actually interact with humanity, and they not only disobeyed, we don't know if there were some good ones, but they not only disobeyed, they actually interbred with humanity, giving rise to the Nephilim.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Very time, when you talk about the early days in Genesis, on the first day and the second day, you're talking about a unit of time. Time is incredibly subjective. When we think about a day or a unit of time, it is very much dependent on our position in or out of the universe. For example, we know that there is such a thing as space-time. Space and time are one together. And if you take a look at quantum gravity, there might not even be something called time. Things change with respect to each other, but time may be an imaginary construct that we experience.
I think it is.
All right. And with time, or with space-time, one thing we know from relativity is that gravity bends not just space, but time itself. Gravity influences time a lot. How much? Well, if you were to take a very precise watch, put it on the floor, and then take another very precise watch, which the two watches are lined up, okay? They're in sync with one another. Put one on the floor, put one on the top shelf in a cabinet. Come back 5 minutes later, guess what? There's going to be a difference.
Like the atomic clocks.
Yes, exactly.
The
The
skyscrapers.
stronger the closer you are to the center of the Earth, the stronger the gravitational pull, and so you're going to get a different time than you would for the time that's farther away. If you were to take a spaceship, and let's say that you had faster than light speed, travel, and you took it and you traveled to the center of our galaxy. Now, our galaxy is full of black holes. Many black holes are the size of our sun. However, there are throughout the universe supermassive black holes, and the one at the center of our galaxy is 1,000,000 times the size of our sun. The million times the mass of our sun, okay? Now, if you were to take a spaceship and park at the event horizon of that, but if you go past the event horizon, then all bets are off. You're going in, there's nothing you can do. But let's say you park just outside the event horizon, keep your jets going. And let's say you stay for a day. When you came back to Earth, 1,000,000 years would have passed. It would be like Planet of the Apes when you got back. Everybody you knew would be dead, and it would be a whole different planet because 1,000,000 years would have passed. The gravity that you experienced when you went to that black hole caused time to rush by so quickly. Your perception of it was only a day. You looked at your watch, 24 hours passed.
Yeah.
But in fact, millions of years were consumed during your time because of the effects of gravity.
Because the clock ran slower too, because it's just a mechanism, it isn't time itself.
That's exactly right. That is precisely right. Time itself doesn't really exist. Only things change with respect to one another. Okay? Now, I bring that up because when we think about who wrote Genesis, where did we get that information about those early days? On what day God did such and such? That had to come from God. So clearly it was God's perspective. All right? And so now the question comes, well, before I get into that, let me just take a look at 1 Peter 3:8 here. This is one scripture with respect to time, because we don't have a lot of Bible verses on this subject. And here's 2 Peter 3:8 and 9. But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. Now, this is not designed to be a science textbook to help us understand exactly what the relationship is, so we can count on this. I mean, it's left perplexing. A day is as 1,000 years, as 1,000 years as a day. That tells me that time doesn't matter that much to him. He's kind of independent of time. And if you take a look and think about it, if he is indeed outside of this universe, our time concept is a part of this universe. It's actually built into the very fabric of our universe. Now the question is, when God created the universe and all of its physical laws, was he like a child inside a sandbox? So imagine that the sandbox represents the entire universe that God has made, and the sandcastle is us. Now the question is, was he inside the sandbox or outside the sandbox when he created us? What was his perspective? Was he allowed to, was he influenced by the factors within that universe? If he was in the universe and near a black hole, then time is going to run differently, depending on what the gravitational forces were in the area. If he was outside of the universe, it's anybody's guess. Let's say that God is like a painter standing outside of the universe and creating our universe. In that case, we don't have a clue what a day means. We don't have any idea what that is. From that vantage point, we don't even have theoretical physics to help us guess what time looks like from outside of the physical universe. As we go through this program, one thing that comes out is it's possible that it could be both. That there could be almost a literal week involved and millions of years. So it sounds crazy, but let me show you what I got. Okay.
I gotta see how close to the
Yeah.
black hole we gotta come.
Okay, all right. How do you explain to primitive peoples that time is relative from place to place within the universe, and who knows what from outside of it? Okay, I said that already. Okay. The point of Genesis is not how he did it, but that God did it. All right, so the word yom, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because we're going to go over it. In Hebrew, yom is the word for day in Genesis. It could mean part of the daylight hours, all of the daylight hours, 24 hours, or a long but finite period of time. And that's just saying. Now, my professor that I had when I was in medical school, my genetics professor, was Francis Collins. And he later became the head of the Human Genome Project. Francis Collins actually stood up in our medical school class and gave his testimony. I actually recorded it. I have it on video. I was the only medical student there that recorded it. Okay.
Well, my gym teacher beat him up.
But he's definitely a theistic evolutionist. Probably the most famous theistic evolutionist there is. He brings up some good points. And there is, not that he is the last word in this debate, but in his book, The Language of Science and Faith, he focuses on junk genes or junk pseudogenes. And these are, in my own research, my PhD, my doctoral, my major is, I got my PhD in experimental pathology. My doctoral project had to do with something called heptamer nonamer palindromic repeats in lymphoid neoplasia. So basically we looked at things like leukemia and lymphoma, and we looked at the fact that some of these so-called junk genes, these introns, actually contained regulatory information. Now, sometimes if you don't,
all junk.
it's not all junk, exactly. And so Collins noticed that, wow, you got about, got a huge percentage of the genome. About 45% of the genome seems to be made of what he calls flotsam and jetsam. All right, so just junk DNA that they start off looking like they code for something, and then it ends in garbage. Now, I will say, and many have brought this out, that a lot of the previously thought of junk has been found to have genetic regulatory functions. So they actually control the expression of other genes, even though they themselves are not transcribed. So that is a thing. I acknowledge that. I guess he does bring up a valid point. To say that all 45% of that is junk, it's probably not. I think that we are finding more and more evidence that those genes do have use, and some of that. I think that the idea of the scaffolding is valid. Okay. However, if you take a look at the sequence of those junk genes and so forth, it looks a lot like other primates. It looks a lot like dogs and mice. We have the same genes, and there's so much homology there that it really does look like we had a common ancestor. Okay, I mean, I'm just saying that if you take a look at the issue of junk DNA and at genetic homology, it does suggest a common ancestor. So
Well,
it does suggest that.
Okay, but I can go you just one further on that
Mhm.
too. Not all creatures that we see some strange ones in the ocean and such.
Yeah, sure.
But for the most part, we're all symmetrical. Why? And if you were going to form like that, I mean, it sounds bizarre, but that's only because of what we're used to. Why wouldn't others or other people or other dogs form just as way they roll or something? We have little insects that ball up and roll to get places. But I'm just saying that there's a lot of similarity that we don't jump to and go, see, dogs, we're all symmetrical. Hey, what's going on? We just go, well, that's how most things are. But it's hard to admit, but you'd say if it was evolutionary, it's like there's no real reason that all these species had to be symmetrical. Not a real.
They look
Good
better.
reason.
They look better.
There you go. But see, that's what I'm saying. That's it's because we're used to it.
Well, one of the arguments that I've used in the past has been, since we all came from the same factory, why wouldn't there be similarities?
Right.
So that's
That's
one thing. But again,
also-
I do think that he brings up a good point, though, that the homology is just really in your face. It's like, wow, this looks just like the mouse, man. That's really impressive. But again, it is what it is. Okay. All right. So which is it? Theistic evolution or fiat creation? I mean, in both cases, we are pointing out that God did it. It's just how he did it. Did he use some type of guided evolution? Now, guided evolution isn't atheistic. Atheistic evolution is things happened by chance on their own. There was no intelligent designer. Theistic evolution says that it occurred, but it was caused to occur by the designer. Okay? Whereas fiat creation says he snapped his fingers, 1 minute you weren't there, the next minute it's there incomplete. Okay? Now, my thesis here is that quantum mechanics communicates that it's possible that both could be true. Both could be true. It's possible that the universe could be thousands of years old and 13.5 billion years old. It's possible that both could be true. And it's crazy. It's crazy, I know.
We're keeping the one world, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. And it's like, and we're not going to multiple parallel universes either. Okay. So enter quantum mechanics. All right. Niels Bohr said, anyone who's not shocked by quantum theory has not understood it.
This is true.
That's true. There are many things that are bizarre about quantum mechanics. There are two really crazy thoughts that come to, and the first crazy thought or idea that we come to in quantum mechanics is that conscious activity, if you have a conscious observer, that they literally create the reality they observed. Prior to measurements or observation, objects have no defined properties or location. The act of a conscious observer creates the existence of the physical objects and the properties they entail instantly.
I don't want to argue quantum mechanics right now especially because I know little about it. But even more than that, what little I do know about it, it's hard to go and explain this. It goes off, not in the Wild Blue Yonder, it just gets deep.
Yeah,
Too much for this.
Yeah.
But just saying
No, it's not too
that,
much for this.
No, I'm just saying that, but it still begs other questions that bother me,
Yeah.
which is this chair, this table is only here in wave function
As a wave
form,
function, as a wave function.
but if you or I look at it, it's the
yeah. It
same,
collapses. Yeah.
same table,
Yes. Yeah.
same dimensions, but the table.
Yeah.
It
yeah.
doesn't collapse into a bear. It doesn't. You know what I mean?
Correct.
So there's still a matrix, I think.
Yes.
You
Yes.
said
Yes.
that
There is
it
a.
says
There
this is a table or not a table with
Yeah.
with the.
Okay, you know a little about quantum mechanics. They don't know, so we need to explain for the
Yeah,
audience
yeah.
the what it is before we get into that, because they don't understand what we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, if they haven't seen this yet.
Well, this is
yeah.
me just.
Yeah, right. right.
Things
okay.
that come to mind.
Okay. The double slit experiment reveals something very strange about the relationship between matter and consciousness, and I have the video that's on YouTube that's very good at explaining what happens here. So I'm just gonna go over that real quick.
An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern! We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So, they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits, and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one, and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
So basically, the idea is when nobody's watching, then matter exists as a wave function. All right? All the possible configurations that matter could take are true.
Seems
All
to
right.
clearly show that.
Exactly. But when you look at it, it collapses into one, the most probable, if you will, within the matrix. So atoms, it doesn't just apply to subatomic particles like electrons. It applies to atoms. It applies to even molecules. Molecules as large as buckyballs have been shown to have these same properties. So it used to be thought, well, for subatomic particles, it works, but big things, it doesn't work. No, there's no reason it shouldn't work on big things. Things we've been able to test, up to things as large as buckyballs, which are multiple carbon molecules, if it can, it works for those as well as it works for electrons. Things exist as wave functions prior to observation. When you observe them, they collapse into matter. Okay? There's a good book on it called Quantum Enigma. I highly recommend it. It was written quite a few years ago now, but it does a very good job of describing this issue. And quantum mechanics is one of the most validated theories in all of physics. 1/3 of our economy is based on products that are dependent on quantum mechanics. Okay, the equations, the observations have never been different than what the equations have predicted. So this is a true thing. It's a very true thing. Independent of observation, particles exist in a state of a wave function. That's a series of potentialities rather than actual objects. Now, it is possible, this is where I get into the meat of it, it is possible that God created man several thousand years ago and that man is the product of millions of years of evolution. Now, I'm not saying that I'm positive of this, that this is what this is a conviction of mine. It's not. I'm just saying this is a possibility. It's possible that, yeah, we were created by special creation and that evolution was utilized in our creation. How can I say that? Well, all right. There's something, quantum experiment shows that the present can change the past, and that's not all. What are they talking about there? Well,
Reality independent of observation doesn't exist. But it doesn't stop here. Prior to this in 1999, the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment was performed. If I'm going to simplify and explain this complex experiment, we need to do so with a hypothetical scenario of modifying the original double slit experiment. Instead of placing the detector at the slit, it is placed past where the particles land. But just before the particles hit the film, it is pulled away and the camera captures the results after they went through the double slit. If they observe a wave, then particles went through the double slit as a wave, and just adding a measuring device doesn't cause them to collapse to particles. But if they collapse to a state of particles at the moment of detection, then even though they went through the slit unobserved and should produce a wave pattern, the very act of observing instantly transforms them into particles. But not only that, a back history is loaded up so that particles went through the double slit instead of a wave. Well, to the dismay of materialists, the results would display particles. Observation creates the existence of particles and loads up a back history so they went through the double slit as particles. Thus it follows particles do not exist unless there is an observer.
okay, now this is where things get really crazy. The observer, even though the observer, even though
They came up with this without drugs.
Huh?
And they came up with this all without drugs.
Yeah. That when the detector was put at the screen, I mean, so in other words, the particle, when it went through the slit, it had to know, in the future I'm going to be observed, so I'm going to behave like a particle instead of a wave. All right? And so, or because of what was done at the screen, the observation went back in time and created a history to explain how the particle got there.
It's so wild, there may be some X factor, but this looks like the two possibilities so far, what you just said.
Yeah.
That it,
Yes, those are the exactly, okay? All right, conscious observation doesn't just create reality, it goes back in time, it edits history, making new realities that didn't exist prior to observation, okay? Think about that. Conscious observation doesn't exist to just create reality. It goes back in time and edits history, making new realities that didn't exist prior to observation. All right? Think about that. All right? Now let's say, so just to give us a model here, let's say you're able to ask God one question and he promises to show you the answer no matter how complex. And so you go, okay? How did you make man? Was it by fiat creation a few thousand years ago, or was it through the process of evolution? All right? So, God says, okay.
First, let me tell you what gave me the idea of creating a hell. And for you, we'll go back in time.
All right.
God's not scared
All
of
right,
questions.
yeah, all right. so God says, all right. He says, that's a toughie because you're constrained by the limitations of the space-time universe that you're a part of. But I can relieve some of those limitations and give you an idea. I'm going to give you a time machine, and I want you to follow my instructions. For the first trip, I'm going to give you the ability to step out of your universe and perceive time as I do. You're going back to about 3 million years before I created man. Okay?
Using Doctor Who's...
Doctor Who's, there you go, using the TARDIS. So. So you hop in the TARDIS, okay, and you go back 3 million years. And what do you find? You got lots of vegetation. Spend a few years there cataloging the animals that you find, the fish, the birds, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. You go through and you categorize all the animals, all the life that not the plants, because that would take a little bit longer, okay? But then you go back and you just do a survey of the planet and you write down all the animals, okay? So you're 3 million years prior to your meeting with God. And what you notice is that in this world, 3 million years ago, there are no lemurs, no monkeys, no apes, no hominids, and certainly no humans, okay? Everything else is there, but that branch is completely missing. So then you hit home on the TARDIS GPS. And you go back to God for further instructions. And God says, okay, now I want you to go to a few moments before my creation of man. All right, let's go say it's 7.5 thousand years ago from your present Earth time. Okay? Back you go. 6,000 BC, approximately. All right. Then God hands you a pair of glasses, and he says, okay, in order to appreciate this next step, you're going to need to be able to see the wave functions or the waveforms of the dirt that I'm putting before you. So he's got his hands full of dirt there, and it looks like dirt. So you put on these glasses, and when you put on the glasses, you're able to see the wave function. Okay, you see and all the possible, the dirt is composed of carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and all these minerals. And you're able to see all the possible configurations that these could potentially collapse into in an instant, okay? All the macromolecular structures, they're wiggling, all the possibilities in front of you. And then God says, okay, look, since you're only here hypothetically, you don't count as a conscious observer because this is all fake, okay? We need a conscious observer in order for my creation to become real. So then one of the watchers, a tall angelic being, he walks over to you and says, hey, I got this. And as soon as he looks at the dirt, the waveform, boom, the waveform collapses into the form of a human male. Okay? Go back to 3 million years ago now. And when you do, what you see is, this is previously what you found, okay, where there's no branch over here leading to from lemurs and monkeys and everything. Suddenly, that whole branch is filled out. And when you go back in time, now you see lemurs, monkeys, apes, and other hominids such as Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus benghazi, and
Piltdown man?
Piltdown man is noticeably absent. Okay, but you see all these things. Yeah, and suddenly they exist. All right? They weren't there before. The creation of man a few thousand years ago created a back history of millions of years of evolution to explain how the molecules of the dirt went from a waveform of billions of possible combinations to the waveform of a human being. God is outside of time. Space-time and gravity are simply ingredients of the universe that God created. And in this particular model, God uses the earth that he created to explain how the human that he created got there. Okay, the same could be said for the creation of the entire cosmos. Could the entire universe have been created 8,000 years ago? Yes. As soon as he creates a star, at 13.5 billion year back history has created to explain how the star got there. And the Big Bang is created because of an event that took place a few thousand years ago. And so in this, what we're seeing is, thanks to quantum mechanics, it is possible that we were made a few thousand years ago and that we evolved over millions of years. It's possible.
I see your point you're making, but I would object to even, one, the need for it when there's a God, two, where God lays
But the need for it.
the need for the millions of years to even have it
think
go back.
think about it. Okay.
Because of God.
Okay.
But if there's a need for it, I know what you're saying,
Yeah.
that you'd have to say, well, as evolutionists are calling in this evidence, so I see the need to.
No. Well, I guess the way I look at this is not that there's need for it because we have to explain evolution so much, but I'm wondering, many of the miracles that God does is not by, he doesn't make things be like, oh, I need a glass of water. Boom, a glass of water appears in front of us, violating all the laws of physics. What will happen, you have a need, and somebody will be moved to come meet that need and right at the right time. God usually does miraculous things in the context of the world that he gave
Because
us.
he doesn't want you to believe in magic.
Precisely, he doesn't do magic,
Yeah,
and
right.
so that's kind of the idea here. And and not that I'm sure this is how it's. I mean, one thing I've learned in looking at this stuff is that the more I learn that I don't know, and I'm really humbled by it. It's actually a humbling thing. It's like, wow, this is incredible. God is amazing. You know, it's incredibly complicated. But I mean, the fact that this is even possible, it's like, you know, this is actually a possible real thing. I don't know, but the question is, did God do the creative things by fiat, or did he use the planet in order to create this? Still, I mean, even if he used evolution, I don't see that taking away any power.
Well, I understand, because it's a miraculous
It's
thing.
still miraculous. It's still
Because
miraculous.
it's still
I mean,
him, because
yeah.
he created, and that's how I put it. This is interesting, but I think we're in this case here, it might be going off the matrix thing, where, you know, this table is still in the matrix, still
Yeah.
the design. There's still somebody else calling this a table.
Yes,
when
yeah,
you do
yeah.
look at it,
Right.
and we both see the same
Yeah.
lawn table
Yeah.
with leaves. We don't see a car. We
Right,
don't see
right,
nothing
right,
else.
yeah.
And so there's that to be considered.
You bring up a good point. The wave functions collapse according to the matrix as designed
Predetermined.
by the creator.
Yes.
Okay, so we live in a matrix of possibilities that are
Limited
confined by possibility. And so when you're talking about his creation, though, in that dirt, with God standing there, there is no limit to what those molecules can become.
in reality.
Yeah, we are.
So that may be legitimate.
I mean, the
concern.
evidence suggests we are in a matrix for the purpose of acting out our free will. This matrix exists for humans, for conscious observers, to act out their free will. That's why we're here. Okay, so we have choices to make. Okay, and this matrix allows us to do them. Okay.
But in that matrix with the collapsing and the wave function and the camera,
Yeah.
this though, going through the backlog, now you're creating all kinds of different matrix to get to that man from the monkey. You know, if you're going back to that evolutionary thing, that's like saying this cold looks similar to pneumonia, so it's pneumonia. You know what I mean? There's misdiagnosis of things vastly by things that look similar.
I'm not following you. I don't understand.
Well, it's like this is still a table,
Yeah.
but when you say, well, man, and then the watcher not only creates the man from the dust, I mean the observer of God's intention that this dust is made.
Yeah.
But now we got a backlog, but the backlog isn't him. The backlog's all different beings.
Yes.
So that's a heck of a backlog.
Yes, it is.
That
Yeah.
starts-
But time is okay.
But
when
that
you're-
backlog is
it's only 14.5 billion years.
but it's violating the
What?
see, those are still wave functions of the thing, of the one thing.
Right.
Still a particle of the one thing.
But, okay.
These are starting to get new things.
Well, I mean, the point being, I mean, I
know the point,
I
but
presented
it
the man to
involves
say
this.
it's like, but I'm saying for every element in creation, the light and the back history to explain light, the stars and the back history to explain the stars, the earth and the back history to explain the earth, you know, are all being created there. So it really is difficult to sort through them. Okay, that's why I mentioned in the initial time travel, he needed to see things from God's perspective, as if God had never created man, because only God could give you that perspective. There's no way a time machine could give us that
Right.
perspective. Okay. Now, as far as Adam's experience is this: Adam wakes up, he's 25 years old. God just created him. what makes man man? What makes him not a hominid, not a monkey? It's not his body. Our bodies look a lot like monkey bodies. They look a lot like ape bodies. What makes us special? God breathed into the human. He put part of his eternal soul into it and made him awake. Adam became awake. And I'm saying 25. I don't know how old Adam was when he was created. I'm just assuming, say maybe 25. Okay. So Adam, God blows the breath in him. Boom. Adam finally has this awareness. Whoa! I just got created and so forth. However, he may have still had memories of his hominid mother. You know, because take a look. Gorillas talk to each other. Chimpanzees talk to each other. They have a society. Okay, they're very primitive. They're like a bunch of 2-year-olds, but still, you know. And so it could be Adam could have had memories from a mom that looked like that looked like not Australopithecus, because that's kind of monkey, but something hominid-like. It's possible, but. You know, that is we just don't know about it. But I mean, that's a possibility. I'm just saying that is.
Yeah, but the animals, you can go down the list. Tools, they all fail. As far as the separation of man and animals.
What do you mean they fail?
Well, because we use tools, they use tools. It doesn't matter how simple.
Yeah.
You use tools, you use tools.
Right.
And we know there's a difference because of that break in every area. They're far removed. But we still see they still used it, so that's not the whole break, is tools and all this.
Right.
But then you get to morality, and there's a break there. Now there's some point where you go, wait, not even that's a break, because they have rules too
They do.
in moral
They do.
situations.
Yeah.
But those aren't completely altruistic, because ours aren't even. But we see on many occasions some really great, complete altruistic moves they don't make. They still say, okay, I'm doing this, but that means you don't bite me. Or I'm doing this, that means you don't. They expect either protection, they expect something in return, where they will never just do it because they like you. It can look like it, though. That's where it gets confusing.
I don't know about that.
Well, once they get to like you after the food,
they
may do something.
Well, I mean, like if you take a look at gorillas who are raised with humans, their affection is pretty impressive. I mean, they just for your return affection, they will do things because they really like.
Well, but the return affection is still not
Yeah.
altruistic. The other thing is, even if they come over and pet you in the head, it's because they want to.
Right.
They,
Okay. All right.
where I'm saying is, we're thin on that too,
Yeah,
but we can see it. We can do
but
it.
The point,
way more than anything.
Yeah. The point though is that once that breath came into man, he became a different creature. And that was beyond evolution.
I understand,
Yeah,
but that's a rough one for me. That monkey, come here,
Well,
and then
yeah.
hey.
Well, I'm just saying it's
I know,
possible. I'm not
I
saying
know.
that I know for
I know,
sure. I'm
I
just
know.
saying that the two don't have to be. There doesn't have to be a dichotomy here. You don't have. It doesn't have to be one or the
but
other.
it is
It could
also-
be some combination of both. I'm just saying.
I know. I think though we should look at that and other, because that's still true science. That what it means, but it's just like the Bible too. It's like this is true. What does it mean? There's exegetics, and then there's hermeneutics, and you got to get what the Bible said exactly. You don't want to go for what it meant. You want to see what it said.
Oh,
Then
right,
you
right,
want
right,
people to
right.
go,
Gotcha,
hey, what does
okay.
this mean to
Yeah.
us
I
here
understand,
today, to
yeah.
them there then? And there shouldn't be too much difference, but it
Right.
could be slightly.
Yeah.
And so with the hermeneutics, you go, this is what it meant because it's a true, but now what does all of it mean? That's the other part of we may get some part of it,
Yeah.
and then maybe you gotta watch how far the steps are taken
Well,
to what it means.
That's where we can end it right there.
Yeah, okay.
What does it all mean?
What is it?
That's up to you guys to decide. So just wanted to give you some options, different way of thinking about it. Don't disown people because their beliefs aren't the same. It's possible that we can all just get along. Okay. All right.
And we can edit this into
It's gonna get edited
3
a lot.
minutes.
Okay.